drawn from actual findings made by archaeologists. However, I don't see how this can be explained. Imagine a tomb that shines softly at night without any illumination or warmth, or a skeleton that lacks any sense of smell or hearing, except for the chains that keep it in place in stone. None of this is a myth. There has been no explanation for these actual discoveries, which have been studied and dug up. Please subscribe and enable the bell so that you do not miss any of the upcoming chapters before we start. Also, put on your headphones for the full experience. This is best experienced in relative silence. All set. Here we go. Floating on a bed of sand is the house. There's a spot in the Sahara where the wind doesn't blow at all. A vast expanse of pale golden sand, devoid of any sound or movement, extended in every direction. However, something peculiar can be discovered if one delves down into a forgotten area and examines it thoroughly. An old stone construction that is partially submerged in the desert floor. In the Sahara, you can often unearth ancient artifacts. This immense desert was originally spanned by old trade routes. As caravans came and went, towns grew and faded. However, with this, it's unique here since a single, sturdy rectangular stone home is slipping into the water. Not crumbling, not buried under shifting dunes, gradually lowering vertically year after year and surrounded by sand. It remains motionless. That solves the first riddle. Drifts of sand from sandstorms gradually engulf and cover most desert structures. However, sand dunes are not tumbling over this house. There has been no sandblasting done to its roof. Rather, it seems to be pushing down into the earth as if it were being yoked. The home was only partly submerged when it was initially uncovered in the early 1900s by archaeologists. Above ground, you can still make out the top of the doorframe. Its sandstone blocks were so precisely carved that they required almost no mortar in their construction. A solitary entrance with no windows. In keeping with the practice of ancient temples, the building was precisely north to south aligned, mirroring the movement of the stars, but there were no exterior carvings or indications of who had constructed it. From within, the room was spare and empty, with merely smooth walls and peculiar floor patterns. There was no furniture, no grave, and no altar. At first, one of the archaeologists noticed that the stone floor at the room's center was slightly concave, as if the very center had dipped ever so slightly. There are no fissures or indications of collapse, rather a subtle bowl form. They first thought it was due to erosion or simply the passage of time. However, during the following many decades, each returning team discovered the identical object. It was a house, lower. The entrance had vanished beneath the Earth's surface in the 1940s. The 1970s saw the roof level with the ground. Today, the only part of the structure that can be made out is its very top, which protrudes just slightly from the beach like a monument's pointed tip. Once again, the sand remains immobile. Satellite images corroborate it. The sand dunes remain unchanged. Nothing builds up. Everything around is motionless. The house is collapsing. Which one is pulling it, then? Sinkholes were suggested by certain geologists. Perhaps a house was constructed atop a delicate cave. One had that gradually crumbled, but scans of the surrounding dirt revealed solid ground. Nothing hollow or flimsy enough to trigger a collapse. Some thought it was all an optical illusion caused by wind erosion, which made the region appear even more submerged. Yet again, numbers don't tell the whole story. The entire structure has sunk more than 3 meters in less than a century, according to laser mapping. Stranger still, on one of the most recent missions, a subtle buzzing was picked up. Diminutive, low volume. Frequency, but only in the room's exact midpoint. Neither machines nor any local electrical sources were responsible for it. It was subtle and unchanging, like a tremor in the atmosphere. A few of the researchers disregarded it, but one persisted for a longer period of time. He stayed up all night by himself, recording noises near the building. He vanished the following morning. Everything in his tent was where it should be, but there were no footprints, drag marks, or indications of a battle. He just disappeared. Nobody was located during the search. The head of The report's authors placed the blame on the desert. Disoriented, lost, and mysterious, people vanish. His tools were still neatly organized, though, and that was puzzling. The mystery of his missing watch and notepad, as well as the mystery of the 6 hours of low rhythmic vibrations captured by the microphone he had left running overnight, remain unsolved. Afterwards, there was exact stillness. At this time, no further excavations are permitted. The region has been defined as potentially hazardous. Nobody goes there, even tourists. Few are even aware that it's there. However, the home has not moved and is still in the process of sinking. It is said by those who, in all honesty, it was never a home. It may have served as a seal, a sign, or a structure to support anything else. There are many who think the builders intended for it to sink into the desert so that it could be reclaimed by nature. Despite the passage of time, no one has been able to explain the precise alignment, the flat, unspoiled sand, the unbroken walls, or the way it continues to sink into the earth as if disappearing on purpose. Whatever it was, it's very almost gone at this point. It will be entirely concealed by the desert in no time. And if nobody mentions it, it could be completely forgotten in the future. However, what lies dormant isn't necessarily resting. And it's not always the case that weak constructions don't sink. They end up in the water because they're easy prey. The teeth-growing doll. When you first lay eyes on such findings, you can feel uneasy. Not because they pose any kind of threat or are particularly scary, but simply because they look so bizarre, like something that shouldn't be there, but is. The setting of this novel is a little, deserted cemetery in a faraway place, far from any current recollection of the past. The burial site belonged to a child. No name, no markings, just a few remnants of clothing and a wooden object placed gently against the body. It was a doll, crude, hand-carved, the kind of object made by someone who didn't have much, but still wanted to leave something behind. But when archaeologists looked closer, they realized it wasn't just a toy. It had real human teeth embedded in its wooden face. Some were cracked, some worn down. One had the faint outline of a very old filling, maybe from the 1700s, and they didn't all come from the same person. Examinations later showed that at least 3 different individuals had donated teeth to this doll. Different ages, different stages of wear. Some from a child, others from adults. Why? That's when the theories began. Some experts pointed to ancient protection rituals where dolls or symbols were placed in graves to keep away evil spirits. But no other artifact like this has ever been found. There's no known burial practice in that region that involves placing real teeth into a carved face. Others wondered if the doll was used in a healing ritual. In some older oral traditions from Europe and Central Asia, stories mention tooth dolls created to absorb pain or sickness, especially in children. Sometimes people believe that disease entered through the mouth and that removing teeth and transferring them into a wooden vessel could draw the illness away. But again, these are only whispers. Until now, no one had ever found a physical version of such a doll. The doll itself was deeply unsettling to look at, not because of its shape, but because it almost looked like it was meant to resemble a real child. The face was featureless, except for the teeth. It gave the illusion of a mouth ready to speak, but with no eyes to see, no nose to breathe, just an open row of silent, mismatched teeth. When the lab began to study it, they discovered tiny symbols scratched into the inside of the wooden body. Not a language, but not random either. They repeated in a pattern, almost like someone was trying to seal something inside. One anthropologist compared them to binding runes used in some regions to lock down spirits or keep curses contained. Then came a strange part. Several members of the research team began reporting odd things in the lab. Cold air without explanation, sudden equipment malfunctions, lights flickering when no one touched the switch. Of course, none of that was written into the official reports. These were respected academics. They deal in facts, not superstition. But the rumors spread quickly. One assistant who handled the doll briefly said she began hearing faint tapping sounds only when she was alone near the storage area. Another refused to work in the building after dusk. Eventually, The doll was moved to deep storage. Not destroyed, not studied further, just quietly removed from view. Some say that's the safest choice. Not because the object itself is dangerous, but because no one understands why it exists. Who made it? Why use human teeth? And why bury it with a child? Was it meant to protect the child from something, or to keep something with her, sealed in the earth, forgotten? To this day, no other doll like it has ever been found. No matching customs, no similar artifacts, just this one, roughly carved, silently watching, holding pieces of people no longer alive. Some discoveries give us answers. Others leave us with questions that echo long after the soil has been brushed away. The bones and the bell. There's a bell in China that hasn't rung in over a century. Not because it's broken, not because it was lost, but because of what was found inside it. It's a massive bronze temple bell over 2 m tall, cast during the Ming Dynasty in a time when great bells were symbols of spiritual balance and imperial power. It was discovered decades ago in a ruined temple near the base of a mountain, long abandoned, half covered by vines and soil. At first glance, it looked like many other ancient bells. Elegant inscriptions, dragon engravings curling around its sides, a single crack near its base. But when workers tried to move it, something shifted inside. A strange, hollow rattle like a stone scraping metal. They assumed it was debris. Maybe coins. Maybe a loose chunk of casting slag. It wasn't. When archaeologists lifted the bell, they found something else inside. Not metal, not tools, but bones. Human bones crushed, compacted, fused into the lower inner curve of the bell's metal walls, burnt into the bronze itself. No coffin, no wrappings, no ceremony, just partial fragments, ribs, jawbone, several finger bones, all belonging to one adult and one child. That changed everything. Bells like this weren't just cast in workshops. They were spiritual projects. Entire communities gathered to pray during their creation. The casting process was sacred, controlled, precise, with detailed records. Yet for this bell, no records existed. No mention of a sacrifice, no note of a worker falling in, not even rumors of someone missing during its construction. The bell itself dates back to the 15th century. It was buried during the collapse of the temple, likely from an earthquake. When researchers began to study its mold patterns, they found that the bones had been there since the moment the bell was created. Not added later, they were cast inside the bronze, which raised a question: was it an accident or intentional? Some believe the child and adult fell in during casting. Bronze bells were made by pouring molten metal into massive molds. Fiery, dangerous work. One wrong step could be fatal. But even in those times, accidents like this would have been remembered, especially involving a child. There were no signs of panic in the mold layer. No repairs. The bell is flawless, its shape smooth, its proportions balanced. Others point to an older belief. In parts of ancient Asia, there were whispered traditions that certain structures, bridges, temples, even bells required a human spirit to bind them to the earth. These weren't common. They weren't publicized. But in some records there are brief, chilling phrases. The child was given to the mold. The soul bound the sound. Could this have been a forgotten ritual? A sacrifice not out of cruelty but fear, to bless the sound of the bell or to silence something else? One more detail adds to the mystery. The bell never rang properly, even before it was buried. Local stories claimed it produced an uneven choke tone, like a cry cut short. Villagers avoided walking near the temple at night. Some claimed the bell made faint sounds on its own. Others heard what sounded like muffled weeping echoing from inside its chamber. Again, folklore. But when modern engineers tested the bell with controlled strikes, they confirmed something strange. The tone is off, not from damage or crack, but from an internal mass affecting its resonance. That mass is bone. The presence of human remains inside a cast bronze object changes its acoustics. Sound waves bounce differently. It's as if the bell's voice is caught, unable to escape fully. Today, the bell is kept in a museum storage facility, far from public view. Not because it's dangerous, but because no one knows how to display it. It's not just a historical object. It's a sealed tomb, a sacred bell with someone still inside it. Was it an accident that no one remembered? A forgotten ritual performed in SE? Or was it something else entirely? Something meant to be lost? We may never know, but the bell remained silent, heavy, and still filled with someone's bone. The buried Colosseum. It began with a faint vibration under the soil. A village in North Africa had been reporting strange tremors for years. Not earthquakes, just small, steady pulses beneath the ground. Most people ignored them. They were too soft to cause concern. But after a heavy rain season, the earth near an old tree collapsed. Beneath the surface, something unexpected was revealed. A smooth carved wall, not a cave, not a natural pit. This was made by hands. Researchers were called in. At first, they assumed it was just a buried building or foundation. But as they kept digging, a circular shape began to emerge. Stone seating, tiered platforms, narrow chambers beneath the floor. The structure was large, over 130 m wide, and it looked like something that shouldn't have been there. It resembled a Roman Colosseum, but it was found thousands of kilometers away from any known Roman ruins. There were no roads leading to it, no Roman tools, no Latin inscriptions, nothing around it matched Roman construction. That raised the question, if the Romans didn't build this, then who did? Some archaeologists thought it could have been a lost Roman outpost, but the materials used didn't match. This was built from reddish limestone, not Roman concrete. The underground chambers were narrower. The entire structure sat deeper in the earth, almost as if it had been carved into the land instead of built above it. The style was familiar, but different. Something about it felt older, more isolated. Carbon dating placed the stones around the 2nd century, right during the height of the Roman Empire. But the village ruins nearby were older than Rome's presence in this part of Africa. So, how did the structure come to be? Some experts suggested it was a case of parallel development. Maybe civilizations across the world discovered similar designs without ever meeting, but that didn't explain the engineering. The columns were perfectly aligned. The stone blocks were cut with mathematical precision. One underground chamber even had traces of lime mortar, a material common in Roman construction, but rare in this region. The more they looked, the less it made sense. Then they discovered something else. An inner chamber hidden beneath the arena floor. There was no stairway to it, no entry from above. It showed up only on it. Ground scan. Carefully, they opened it. Inside, they found bones, 3 skeletons, 1 adult, and 2 smaller ones, possibly children. The bodies were laid gently. No weapons, no signs of violence, no treasure, only one strange object, a round stone disc with engraved symbols. The symbols didn't match any known culture. They weren't Roman. They weren't African. They were completely unknown. After the discovery, the chamber was resealed. Some said it was done out of respect. Others said it was fear. No one really knows. The Colosseum has since been covered again, not destroyed, protected. It doesn't appear on public maps. Only a few researchers are even allowed near it. They're still trying to piece together how it got there, who built it, and why. There's no written record, no legends, no name. It's like it was never supposed to be found. The buried Colosseum challenges the timeline. It forces us to ask if the Romans really were the only ones building such wonders, or if there was another civilization, one that rose, created something remarkable, and vanished before history could record it. Now the structure sleeps beneath the soil again, silent, preserved, watching. Some things are buried for a reason, and some stories may not be ready to be told. The mountain that moved in the high altitudes of the Andes. A mountain moved. That may sound impossible, but in 2018, a set of satellite scans recorded a geological anomaly that stunned scientists. One of the peaks shifted 3 full meters overnight, not over years, not slowly with erosion. Overnight, the mountain didn't collapse. There was no landslide, no earthquake, no signs of natural disaster. It simply shifted as if nudged by something from below. At first, researchers thought it was a sensor error. Satellites sometimes show false readings, but after rechecking the raw data from 3 different sources, all confirmed the same thing. A 700 m wide ridge had moved south by exactly 31 m. Then came a second surprise. High-resolution imagery showed a pattern emerging near the base of the mountain. Not erosion, not animal. Tracks, but long, straight shadows. They were thin, evenly spaced and rectangular. They looked like man-made tunnels. When ground teams reached the site, it wasn't easy to investigate. The mountain sits in a remote part of southern Peru. No roads, no nearby towns, just stone, air, and sky. But when they arrived, what they found was stunning. The mountain's rock base had cracked open, not from above like a split from an earthquake, but from below, as if something inside had pushed upward. Within that rupture, researchers found a tunnel entrance, not a natural cave. The walls were too smooth, too symmetrical, roughly 3 m tall and 2 m wide. The tunnel curved downward into darkness. The team followed it for about 30 m before it split into two paths. They stopped there, not because they ran out of space, but because the air grew thin, their sensors began behaving strangely, and the temperature dropped sharply despite being inside solid rock. One archaeologist described the sensation as walking into a cold breath, not wind, just cold, pressing air that felt almost alive. Later scans revealed that the tunnel system ran deeper than expected, at least 3 levels, possibly more. The chambers extended hundreds of meters beneath the mountain. Some dead-ended, others looped. One even formed a spiral leading straight downward. No one knows how deep it really goes, but the materials puzzled everyone. There are no support beams, no torch marks, no tools found, and yet the tunnels were solid, precisely carved. Even stranger fragments of metal were found embedded in the stone walls. Not metal tools, but thin sheets pressed between stone layers like fossilized skin. When tested, the metal didn't match any known local alloys. It was extremely pure, almost unnaturally refined. And there was one more detail. At the lowest accessible level, just before the team turned back, they found carvings not on the walls, on the floor. Perfectly circular symbols, interlocked, geometric. They didn't match Inca art. They didn't match any known Indian culture, and they weren't carved with a chisel. There were no cut marks. It was as if the symbols had been burned or melted into the stone without damaging the surrounding floor. That's when the team pulled back. They sealed the tunnel temporarily, and they left. Since then, the Peruvian government restricted further excavation. Only limited academic studies have been allowed. No drilling, no deep entry, and no official explanation for the movement of the mountain. Some believe it was a natural event, a rare geological pulse, but there were no tremors, no shifting plates, no pressure buildup. Others suggest it was an undiscovered fault line releasing pressure. But again, no quake was recorded, not even a minor one. A few researchers proposed something more unsettling. What if the mountain didn't move on its own? What if something under it caused the shift? We know ancient cultures in South America had legends of underground cities, myths of gateways hidden in stone, stories of places where people could walk into the mountains and vanish. Some of those legends describe doorways that only open at specific times when stars align or when the earth shifts. Could this be one of those places? To this day, the tunnel entrance remains sealed, covered with rock and monitored by sensors. No updates have been shared with the public, and the satellite scans of the area have stopped being published. It's as if the mountain is being forgotten on purpose. A structure moved, a tunnel appeared, and a mystery was uncovered, then hidden again. Some places keep their secrets by staying buried. Others may not want to be found at all. The scroll that writes back it was found in a cave that hadn't been opened in over 2,000 years. Just west of the Dead Sea, near a ridge of broken cliffs, a team of archaeologists uncovered a small sealed chamber behind a wall of collapsed stone. Inside was nothing remarkable at first. Some pottery, fragments of bone, a few carved beads. But near the corner, wrapped in brittle linen and tucked into a carved-out space in the wall, was a scroll, thin, dark, almost like charred leather. They thought it would crumble if touched. But strangely, the material held firm. It didn't disintegrate. It almost felt elastic. Researchers assumed it was made from animal skin, maybe goat. They brought it to a lab for preservation, expecting it to be blank or filled with faded ink. But the scroll had no visible writing until someone touched it. During an examination, a researcher gently ran their gloved finger across the surface. And as they did, dark marks began to form behind the movement, like ink rising from beneath. The surface. At first, they thought it was just moisture reacting with old material. But within seconds, the marks faded and reappeared, but in a slightly different shape. It was as if the scroll was rewriting itself. They repeated the test, this time using high-resolution cameras, and again after contact, symbols began to show. Not Hebrew, not Aramaic, something else. Geometric, deliberate, and shifting. As the finger passed over them, the shapes changed almost like the scroll was responding, not randomly, but reactively. The room went silent. The researcher looked up and said just one thing. I think it's writing back. After that, they stopped touching it directly. They used light pulses, infrared, ultraviolet. Still the same result. New symbols would appear, then vanish again. Each time, slightly different. The scroll wasn't damaged, but didn't reveal a fixed message. There was no stable text. Instead, it seemed to behave more like a surface memory responding to input than resetting. That's when theories began. One suggested it wasn't a scroll at all, but a device created long before the concept of writing as we know it. Others thought it might be a spiritual artifact used by ancient mystics to receive visions or guidance. But one thing was clear, this was not ordinary parchment. Advanced analysis revealed something strange. The material wasn't just animal hide. It had microscopic fibers of metallic compounds threaded into it. Not naturally occurring, not from the surrounding region. In fact, the combination of organic and inorganic material resembled modern flexible circuits. But it was over 2,000 years old. Nothing like this had ever been found in Israel before, and no culture from that time had the technology to create such a thing. That's when the scroll was sealed. After a few weeks of study, the artifact began to change. Some researchers claimed they saw symbols appearing without contact. At night, on their own, one assistant said the shapes began to repeat, forming patterns, and in one case, a name appeared. His name, it vanished before. It could be recorded, but it was enough to unsettle the team. Soon after, the decision was made to stop all testing. The scroll was placed in a vacuum-sealed container surrounded by light-dampening material and stored in a secure facility in Jerusalem. It's not on display. It's not listed in any public archive, only referenced in a footnote from a private archaeological journal. And only a few know where it really is. To this day, no one knows how it works, or why it reacts, or what its shifting symbols mean. Some think it's a forgotten technology. Others believe it's not meant to be understood, only experienced. It doesn't fit into any known timeline. It doesn't match any known language. And yet it clearly does something. It responds. Maybe it was a tool used by a forgotten order. Maybe a map, or maybe a kind of ancient interface waiting for someone who knows how to read it. Or maybe it was never meant to be touched. The grave that glows in the forests of central Sweden, tucked into a clearing surrounded by thick pine and birch, lies. A forgotten Viking tomb. To most, it looks like just another mound of stone, rough, moss-covered, marked only by a tilted run stone weathered by centuries of rain and snow. But this grave is not like the others, because at night it glows not brightly, just a soft, faint shimmer visible only when the moonlight is low. It isn't dramatic, just enough to make you pause, to make you look twice and wonder if your eyes are playing tricks. Local villagers have known about it for generations. They call it Luz Graven, the light grave. No, one visits it after sunset, not because of fear, but because of respect. The story first reached scientists when a group of hikers captured footage of the glowing mound. At first, people assumed it was a camera glitch or maybe a trick of moonlight on wet stone. But as more footage emerged from different cameras in different seasons, it became harder to dismiss. Eventually, a small archaeological team was sent to investigate. They expected to find some kind of chemical cause, maybe phosphorescent fungus, maybe minerals in the soil. But what they found confused them. The stones were ordinary granite. No signs of metal or lichen that could glow. The moss that covered the surface wasn't bioluminescent. No rare fungi. No trace of modern contamination, just nature. And yet on certain nights, the glow returned. They ran every test they could. Thermal imaging, spectral analysis, electromagnetic readings, and still nothing out of the ordinary. Except for the light itself. The tomb structure is typical of Viking burial mounds, a stone chamber beneath the earth. No treasure found inside, just fragments of bone and a ceremonial axe. Carbon dating suggested the site was nearly 1,200 years old. The bones belonged to a male in his 40s, tall, even by Viking standards. Healthy, likely a warrior or leader. But something about the burial was different. The chamber was lined with polished slabs of stone, not rough rock, polished, reflective, and set into the ceiling of the tomb was a thin disk of slate, nearly translucent. It wasn't carved. It wasn't marked. It was just there. When light was shined through it, the stone faintly shimmered just like the glow above the mound. But it wasn't the source, only a clue. One theory emerged that the tomb was designed to channel natural light through the structure itself. That the polished stones beneath created a reaction reflecting just enough ambient moonlight upward back through the moss and soil. A kind of ancient optical illusion. But that didn't explain why the glow sometimes happened on cloudy nights or even during new moons. Another theory suggested an electromagnetic phenomenon. Some graves are located near geological faults. Minor shifts in Earth's magnetic field can cause small glowing discharges, but tests ruled that out too. There was no magnetic activity. In the end, science ran out of answers. That's when folklore returned. Local legends tell of a Viking chieftain who was buried not just with weapons, but with a stone from the sky. A piece of light passed down through generations said to protect the grave from evil and light the way for the soul in the afterlife. Of course, there's no proof, no records of such stones, no known artifacts that match that description. And yet, when you stand before the mound on a quiet night and you see the faint shimmer on its surface, it doesn't feel like superstition. It feels like a message. Today, the grave is monitored but not disturbed. It isn't open to the public. There are no fences or signs, just coordinates shared among a few researchers, and the stories of those who live nearby. People still walk past it in daylight. They leave small offerings, stones, coins, feathers. No one touches the grave. And when the sun sets, they leave because some places were not built to be understood. They were built to be remembered. The island of unfinished statues. Far out in the Pacific, surrounded by open ocean and silence, there is an island most maps barely mention. It doesn't appear in travel brochures. There are no airports, no ports, just steep cliffs, scattered vegetation, and stone. But what draws people to this island isn't the view. It's the mystery, because all across its surface are dozens of statues. Giant figures carved into the hillsides. Some towering 10 tall, some just barely taking shape. And the strangest part, none of them are finished. Every statue sits frozen mid-creation. Tools still lie near them. Stone chisels, rounded hammers, some wedged into cracks, as if dropped in a moment of pause. The statues are carved directly from a bedrock. Some are still half connected to the mountain. Others were clearly being moved before they stopped, leaning forward, tilted in trenches, resting on logs meant to roll them forward. But then nothing, no signs of battle, no burn marks, no cave-ins, just a halt, as if everyone working there simply walked away. The island has no official name in modern records, but local oral traditions call it Terry Moa, which loosely translates to the place of waiting stone. And that's exactly what it feels like. The statues have eyes but no pupils, hands but no fingers. Their bodies seem almost finished, but their heads are left rough, unrefined, waiting. Archaeologists first stumbled onto the island in the early 1900s. They believed it was another offshoot of Polynesian culture. And yet the style didn't match nearby islands. The materials didn't match either. These weren't volcanic stones. They were carved from a pale basalt, not found on neighboring land. Worse, no settlements have ever been found on the island. No homes, no burial grounds, no food storage pits, no boats, nothing except the statues. Carbon dating placed the tools in wood fragments around the year 1250, roughly the same time period as Easter Island's Moa. So, naturally, comparisons were drawn, but there's one big difference. On Easter Island, the statues were finished. Some were raised, some were transported. Here, none of that happened. These weren't abandoned gradually. It was sudden, and according to ground scans, there are even more statues buried beneath the hills. Some as deep as 5 m down, which means this wasn't a one-time event. They were working here for years, maybe centuries, until they weren't. Some scientists suggest famine or disease, that the island ran out of resources, or that a wave wiped out the carvers, but again, no bones were found. No graves, no tools left in panic. Everything is exactly where it would be if the workers had simply stepped away mid-task. One hammer sits on a ledge above a statue's eye, still balanced, untouched by wind or time. Another lies on the ground, half buried, yet perfectly preserved. It's as if the island has been in pause mode ever since that final day. Then there are the stories passed down from nearby islanders who say the island is cursed, that the stones were alive, that the statues were not gods, but prisoners, and that finishing them would have woken them. Others speak of a great storm that came without warning, swallowing the island in a day of fog. When it cleared, the workers were gone. But there's no record of such a storm and no evidence of natural disaster. So the question remains, what happened here? Who were these people? Why did they make so many statues? And why did they stop all at once? Today, the island is protected. It's rarely visited. Access requires permission from multiple heritage agencies, and even then only a few are allowed on a time. The statues remain untouched, still waiting, still unfinished, still watching. Whatever story they were meant to tell has been lost or buried beneath the soil. But something about them lingers, a silence, a presence, as if the work was never meant to be finished. The tower that appeared overnight. In the summer of 2006, a farmer in western Romania woke up and looked across his field. Everything seemed normal. Rows of wheat swaying gently in the breeze. The same view he'd seen every morning for years. But then he noticed something new, something impossible. In the middle of the field stood a stone tower, roughly 6 m tall, cylindrical, weathered, as if it had been standing there for centuries. But it hadn't. It hadn't been there the day before. There were no truck tracks, no footprints, no broken wheat, just the tower, perfectly upright in the center of the field. And no one had any idea where it came from. The farmer called local authorities. At first, they didn't believe him. They thought it was a hoax until they saw it for themselves. The tower wasn't made of modern bricks or concrete. It was constructed from irregular stone blocks, stacked with surprising precision. No mortar, no visible binding agent, and yet it was completely stable. A single narrow slit ran vertically down one side, like an arrow window from a medieval fort. But the inside was solid. No entrance, no ladder, no chambers, just a sealed monolith of stone. Geologists examined the foundation and found no disturbance in the soil, no signs of digging. The wheat directly around it was bent slightly outward, but not broken, as if the tower had somehow displaced the field gently without damaging it. That made no sense. You can't lower a structure like that without heavy machinery. And even then, the ground would show it. But there were no signs, just stone and questions. The news spread fast. Curious locals came to see it. Some claimed it was a message. Others said it was a hoax planted during the night, but satellite footage told a different story. Aerial imagery from 2 days earlier showed nothing. Flatland, just crops. And then, on the morning of June 21st, the tower appeared. No vehicles, no construction, just there. A Romanian TV crew did a feature. They brought magnetometers and ground-penetrating radar. The results were strange. The stone wasn't local. It resembled a kind of limestone found hundreds of kilometers away, and the foundation extended deeper than expected, almost 2 m into the ground. But again, the soil layers were undisturbed. It was as if the tower had grown from the ground or been phased in. Folklore started to build. Some said it was an old watchtower that returned. Others believed it was a marker left by an ancient civilization that once lived underground. A few even whispered that it was a time-slip artifact, something from the past or future, momentarily visible in the present. But when tested further, the stone showed signs of extreme age, not newly cut, weather-worn, smooth edges, tiny lichen growths that would have taken decades to form. Yet, the tower wasn't there a week before. How can something be both ancient and new? Eventually, authorities fenced it off. They didn't remove it. They didn't investigate further. They just left it there. The landowner was compensated. The wheat field was partially abandoned, and slowly the story faded. Today, the tower still stands. It hasn't moved. It hasn't changed. No one has entered it because it can't be entered. It's just there in the middle of a field. Silent, heavy, timeless, like a bookmark left in history, pointing to a page we can't read. The well with no bottom in a quiet corner of rural India. There is a well that locals call Anthin Kwa, the well with no bottom. It sits beneath a banyan tree hidden by overgrown shrubs surrounded by silence. No signage, no railing, just a round stone mouth that stares into endless black. Villagers have known about it for centuries. They don't use it for water. They don't throw coins into it. And they never look into it after dark. They say it's sacred or cursed. Or maybe both, because no one has ever reached the bottom. According to local legend, the well was dug during a drought hundreds of years ago. But after the water failed to rise, the workers kept digging day after day, month after month. Eventually, the workers stopped coming out. Tools were lowered and never retrieved. Voices echoed up, then fell. Silent. One version of the story says the workers struck something ancient, something that opened, not downward but inward. Another version says the well was never dug at all. It was always there. In 2011, a group of university researchers visited the village to explore the legend. They brought rope, cameras, a lightweight depth gauge. The villagers warned them not to interfere, but the team went ahead anyway. They dropped the sensor. 50 m, 100, 200, no contact. The rope kept feeding. 300 m, still nothing in static. The line went dead. The camera stopped transmitting. Just like that, when they pulled the rope back up, they found it frayed, almost shredded, but not from friction, more like something had grabbed it. They packed up that same day, and they never published their findings. One explorer from the group later admitted something strange. As he stood near the edge, watching the rope disappear, he said he felt a sound not heard, but inside his bones, a low vibration like the well was humming. Another researcher claimed that the shadow inside didn't act like normal darkness. It seemed to move against the light. Even when the sun was directly overhead, the well's interior remained black. Not dim, not deep, just black. And when flashlights were pointed in, the beam didn't reflect. It just vanished like the light was being swallowed. There are no animals near the well. No birds land on its edge. No insects buzz above it. The air around it is strangely still, cooler than the surrounding area. Like standing near a vent, but there's no sound, no airflow. No dripping water, just silence. Villagers still avoid it. Children are warned never to play near it, and no one draws near during a full moon. They say that's when the well is awake. In 2018, a small team returned with new tech, drones, sonar, and ground-penetrating radar. They tried again to measure its depth. This time, the drone descended for nearly 600 meters before losing contact. No signal interference, just gone. The sonar returned only static pulses. No solid bottom, no echo, as if the signal just kept falling. There's a growing theory among fringe researchers. They suggest the well isn't a shaft at all, that it's a void, a space out of sync with normal geography, a glitch in the world, or maybe a sealed entrance to something buried and forgotten. Some even propose it's a collapsed vertical cave or an ancient borehole that predates civilization. But there's no record of mining in the area, no tunnels, no seismic instability. and the stones surrounding the well are old, smooth, polished by time, as if thousands of hands once touched them, then stopped. The Indian government has never investigated the well officially. It's not on maps. It's not in textbooks. It doesn't even have a plaque. Just villagers and memory and fear. Whatever lies beneath that opening, if anything, has never been reached, never measured, never explained. It's just a hole in the ground, but one that seems deeper than physics allows and older than anyone remembers. If you see me, cry. In the late summer of 2022, Europe faced a drought worse than anything in living. Memory. Rivers dried up, fish died in shallow water, farms withered in the heat. But as the water disappeared, something far older began to emerge. All across Europe, from the Elbe in Germany to the Vltava in the Czech Republic, stones began to rise from beneath the riverbeds, rough, weathered, barely visible when the water was high, but now exposed. Each stone carried words carved centuries ago in old languages, chiseled by hand, and many of them carried the same chilling phrase. If you see me, cry. They're called hunger stones, markers from the past, warnings left by people who once faced the same catastrophe, a drying river, a failing harvest, and the coming of famine. The stones were placed during periods of extreme drought. Some date back to the 1400s, others to the 1600s. All were meant to be seen only when water levels reached a critical low, which meant if you could see the words, "You were in danger," one stone reads, "When this goes under, life will blossom again another. If you see this stone, weep." For the children, these weren't just notes. They were survival messages etched into rock by people living through starvation, war, and disease. People who knew that one day the water would drop again and someone would need the warning that someone was us. Archaeologists began cataloging the stones. Each one told a different story. Some were carved with dates of past droughts, the years when rivers dried so far that crops failed and famine swept through villages. Others listed the prices of bread and grain written in. Panic as inflation spiked. Still others were marked with symbols of death, skulls, crosses, the names of children lost during those years. And yet, despite being centuries old, the words remained clear, not faded, not erased. Because when stone dries under scorching sun, it remembers. One of the most haunting stones lies along the El River in the Czech Republic. It has been revealed more than once throughout history during the drought of 1616, again in 1904, and now again in our time. It reads, "If you see me, cry." The water was low in 1417, 1616, 1707, 1746, 1790, 1800, 1811, 1830, 1842, 1868, 1892, 1893, 1904, and 1918. It's not just a list. It's a timeline of suffering, a record of each time hunger returned. This one stone alone spanned 6 centuries of warning, and it resurfaced once more right now. What makes these hunger stones so unique is that they were never meant for glory. They weren't monuments. They weren't placed to impress kings or gods. They were tools, messages to the future. In a time before satellites and climate reports, people carved what they knew into the most permanent material they had, rock. And in doing so, they left behind something more powerful than data. They left emotion, fear, hope, urgency. Now in our era of technology and comfort, the past is whispering back. Not from ruins, not from buried scrolls, but from the riverbeds themselves. As the drought deepens, more stones may appear. Some in places not seen for generations. Some carrying new messages we've never read before. It's not just Europe. Similar markers exist around the world, in China, in India, even in North America. And each time they reappear, it means the land is drying. The rivers are failing. The past is returning. And it's telling us something important, that this has happened before. And each time it came with pain. The shaman's secret bag high in the desert mountains of southwestern Bolivia. There's a cave that almost no one visits. It's dry, empty, forgotten by time, just dust, wind, and rock. But deep inside this cave, tucked into a crevice where only flickering light can reach, archaeologists found something no one expected. A leather pouch sealed with twine untouched for nearly 1,000 years. At first, they thought it was a simple relic, maybe a medicine bundle or a toolkit. But what they found inside changed everything. Because this wasn't just any pouch. It belonged to a shaman, and what it held should have been impossible. Inside the pouch were carefully wrapped plant remains, well preserved, still holding color, still giving off faint earthy scents. But here's where it gets strange. The plants didn't grow anywhere near the cave, not in the region, not even in the climate zone. They came from the Amazon rainforest, hundreds of kilometers away. Thick jungle, lush, humid, and green. Nothing like the cold, dry, high-altitude desert where this cave sat. And yet there they were, packed tightly with purpose. Ayahuasca vine, cocoa leaves, Bananisteriopsis copy, seeds used for hallucinogenic snuffs, all bundled by hand. All known to be powerful psychoactive plants. This wasn't random. The shaman didn't carry these herbs for trade. He carried them for ritual, for vision. The pouch even included inhalation tubes carved from animal bone, tiny wooden tablets for crushing and mixing, a spatula smoothed by use, and the pouch itself made from stitched fox faces. 3 of them tanned, shaped, and sewn together into a bag of fur, bone, and intent. Nothing was accidental. Every detail was symbolic. A mobile altar designed to open portals inside the mind. But that still leaves the question, why carry jungle plants to a mountain desert? To answer that, archaeologists looked at trade routes, and what they found is remarkable. Even over 1,000 years ago, ancient Indian cultures had vast networks stretching from the mountains to the coast and deep into the jungle. Shamans, they believe, were some of the few who traveled the full length not for gold, not for conquest, but for knowledge, for sacred plants, for connection to spirits their own land didn't offer. The pouch wasn't just rare. It was the first archaeological proof that ancient South Americans combined specific plants to create complex, psychedelic brews centuries before modern science knew how. One of the compounds in the pouch only works when paired with another. Separately, they're mild. Together, they open the mind. That means this shaman knew. He understood how to extract and combine these plants across ecosystems. And he chose to carry them not to a village, but to a cave alone, far from others, far from distraction. One theory says he came here to fast and journey inward, to speak with spirits, to leave the physical world behind and ask questions only the mountain could answer. Another theory is more personal, that this cave was his resting place, his final journey. And the pouch wasn't lost. It was left, sealed with intent, a final message, not in words, but in ingredients. Today, the pouch is preserved in a Bolivian museum, but researchers still study the plants inside. They found that just one wrong dose could have been poisonous, which means the shaman wasn't guessing. He was trained, precise, experienced. What he saw in that cave may never be known, but what he left behind is proof that ancient medicine wasn't crude. It was powerful, spiritual, and far more advanced than we once believed. The unplundered royal tomb. In the rolling hills of Eastern Europe, far from cities and far from roads, a small rise in the earth caught the attention of a local farmer. It looked like just another bump in the land, barely noticeable. But satellite scans had revealed something different beneath the soil. A circular anomaly, perfect in shape, man-made. Archaeologists were called in. They believed it to be an old burial mound, possibly looted long ago. Most ancient tombs in the region had been emptied centuries earlier. Bones stolen, gold melted, walls caved in. But when the team began digging, they realized this tomb had never been touched. 2 and 1/2 m below the surface, a stone crypt appeared. It was sealed with thick slabs, perfectly aligned. No cracks, no signs of forced entry. The team removed the top stones one by one, and what they found inside was beyond anything they expected. Gold, more than 100. Objects intact, gleaming, untouched by time. Earrings, decorated cups, intricate bracelets, a sword hilt encrusted with tiny gems. The treasure was overwhelming. But that wasn't the most shocking part. What truly stunned the team was the bones. Inside the crypt were the remains of 6 people buried across different layers. Each body placed with care, not tossed, not scattered, but arranged. The most recent skeleton lay at the top, adorned with gold plates sewn into faded fragments of cloth. A crown rested near the skull, clearly a person of great status. But beneath them, things became more curious. The other bodies were older, slightly disturbed, but not accidentally. It looked as though each time a new person was buried, the older remains were repositioned, folded, shifted aside, still honored, still included. It wasn't a single grave. It was a family crypt. And yet, something was off. One of the middle skeletons had no skull. Another was missing both arms, but not due to violence. The cuts were precise, surgical, and one of the bodies was facing upward, unlike the rest. Its arms were outstretched, its hands open, as if waiting to receive something. Researchers couldn't explain it. There were no signs of ritual sacrifice, no battle wounds, no chaos, just perfect silence, perfect order, perfect gold. Carbon dating placed the burial mound around the 4th century BCE, older than many royal sites in the region. And the wealth suggested the people here were tribal elites, possibly rulers of a forgotten culture. But here's the twist. Nothing about their tomb matched neighboring traditions. The gold work was foreign. The burial method was unusual. Even the layout of the tomb, built with expanding space, as if designed for future use, was unlike anything seen before. Whoever they were prepared. They knew others would follow. They planned for generations of burials, but for some reason it stopped. After the 6th burial, no more. Why? There's no record of war at the time. No signs of plague, no fire, just an end. As if the lineage vanished or chose to disappear. And despite the wealth, the tomb was never looted, not once. Archaeologists believe the entrance was intentionally hidden, buried deeper than usual, and the region itself was avoided. Local legends spoke of sacred ground, a place you shouldn't walk alone. People didn't dig here. They respected it or feared it. Either way, the tomb survived untouched for over 2,000 years. Today, the items are stored in a secure archive, still being cataloged, still being studied. But the bones remain where they were, preserved, still arranged, still watching. The team decided not to move them. They said it felt wrong, like breaking a promise, because something about that tomb didn't feel like history. It felt present, like the dead still had their place, and we were only visitors. The tsunami that buried a city. Most ancient cities are lost to time, through war, collapse, or nature. But one of the most iconic in the Americas, Teotihuacan, wasn't just abandoned. It was buried, not slowly, not by centuries of dust and erosion, but by a sudden and overwhelming force. When archaeologists began to excavate parts of the site, they didn't just find stones and ruins. They found entire districts covered by meters of packed earth, layers so thick and so deliberate. It looked like the city had been intentionally sealed away. But why and by whom and how? Teotihuacan sits northeast of modern-day Mexico City, a city of pyramids, wide avenues, and massive plazas. At its height, around 100 CE, it was home to over 100,000 people, larger than most European cities at the time. A center of culture, religion, and power. But sometime between 550 and 600 CE, it collapsed. Theories abound: internal revolt, drought, economic breakdown. But none explain what happened after, because Teotihuacan wasn't just left behind. It was entombed. In some neighborhoods, archaeologists found homes and temples filled with fine ash and silt, packed in tight. In others, entire rooms were discovered with walls still intact, but with ceilings bowed from the weight of something dumped on top. It wasn't natural. It wasn't gradual, and it wasn't accidental. One researcher ran a soil analysis and found the earth packed above the city didn't match local erosion. It had been hauled in, possibly moved from nearby mountains, moved deliberately, and in such volume that one estimate suggests it took more earth to bury the city than it took to build the Pyramid of the Sun. That's no coincidence. That's an effort, a plan. Some theorists suggest it was a ceremonial burial, that the people who remained after the fall chose to cover Teotihuacan to preserve its power or to protect it, as if the city had become sacred or dangerous. Others believe it was an act of revenge, a defeated culture sealing away the memory of its conquerors layer by layer until all that remained was silence. But there's another theory, one far less human. In 2015, a team studying erosion patterns noticed something odd. The sediment on top of certain structures didn't just look dumped, it looked washed. They ran deeper analysis and found traces of marine-like sediment, tiny particles usually found in ocean-influenced soils. But Teotihuacan is nowhere near the coast. There are no nearby rivers powerful enough to flood the site, and there are no signs of natural landslides. Yet some of the fill looked like it had been forced and under pressure. As if by a wave could a tsunami have hit this inland city. It sounds impossible, but deep underground, archaeologists found signs of sudden water damage, burst walls, compacted mud, bones scattered across sealed rooms. Some hypothesize a seismic lake tsunami, a rare geological event where an earthquake causes a lake or underground basin to rupture, sending inland waves across dry land. It's rare but not unheard of, and the damage it causes looks a lot like what they found. Other scientists reject the tsunami theory. They say the water evidence could have come from post-collapse flooding or even heavy rains. But the deeper question remains, if Teotihuacan was damaged by nature, why did someone then go to the trouble of burying it? This wasn't defensive. This wasn't accidental. This was intentional concealment. Walls buried clean. Altars covered without breaking. Tools still inside homes, as if the owners thought they'd return, but they never did. And then there's the tunnel. In 2003, a team uncovered a sealed shaft beneath the temple of the feathered serpent. Inside were strange items, liquid mercury, tiny carved statues, traces of a gold-lined chamber, like a miniature underworld. Was it part of a ritual, a royal tomb, or something buried to keep it hidden? Whatever the reason, the people of Teotihuacan seemed determined to leave nothing behind. And when they left, they covered their world with silence and soil. The Dragon Man skull in 1933. A Chinese laborer working on a bridge near Harbin, northeast China, made a discovery. Didn't realize it at first. Just a heavy object embedded in the riverbank mud, covered in soil, thick, cold, solid. When he lifted it, he saw bone, but not like any animal he'd seen. This was a skull, massive, heavy, human-shaped, but not quite human. The man was afraid. At the time, China was under Japanese occupation. Any artifact could be claimed or taken. So he did something quiet. He took the skull home and hid it. Not in a museum, not in a box, in a well. And there it stayed, buried once again for nearly 90 years. It wasn't until 2018, after the man passed away, that his family revealed the secret, and the skull was handed over to scientists at Hybe University. When the researchers saw it for the first time, they knew it was something extraordinary. The skull was massive, larger than a modern human's. The brain case was huge, shaped like ours, but the face was wider, the brow ridge heavier, the eye sockets nearly square. Its teeth were flat but big, the cheekbones high and sharp. The skull felt familiar, but it wasn't us. They named it Dragon Man, not for fantasy, but for the Dragon River, where it was found. Its scientific name, Homo longi. But here's where it gets strange. The skull was dated to be at least 146,000 years old, possibly older. That puts it in the same time range as Neanderthals, but the features don't match. It's not Neanderthal, it's not Denisovan, and it's not Homo sapiens. It's something in between or beyond, a lost branch of our family tree. 3 separate research teams examined the fossil. Each came to a similar conclusion. This wasn't just a rare human fossil. It was a potential new species. But here's the twist. Dragon Man might be closer to us than Neanderthals. In evolutionary terms, that changes everything. If Homo longo existed alongside our species, where did they go? And why did no one ever find more of them? What truly unsettled the scientists was this. Dragon Man's skull showed no sign of disease, trauma, or deformity. He was strong, well-fed, possibly adapted to cold climates, and based on bone structure, maybe even capable of speech. He could have walked beside us, hunted beside us, spoken, planned, remembered. But he didn't leave a culture. No tools, no fire pits, no cave art, just a skull buried in silence. Some believe Dragon Man could be Denise, a mysterious ancient human group known mostly from tiny fragments. But others argue the skull is too complete, too different. It might be a new lineage entirely, one that disappeared without a trace. Was it isolation? Did they merge with our ancestors and vanish into us? Or were they wiped out by cold, by war, by time? We may never know. Today, the Dragon Man skull is stored under strict conditions, protected, scanned, analyzed, but still holds secrets. It has no companion fossils, no bones, no tools, no home, just a single skull, a face from the deep past, heavy, quiet, waiting, the village that vanished in the snow. In the vast white silence of Siberia, where winter stretches endlessly and time feels frozen, there once stood a small village, not large, just a cluster of wooden homes tucked near the edge of a forest. No roads, no cities nearby, just snow, trees, and wind. The village had been there for generations. Simple lives, hunters, fishermen, families raising children far from noise and modernity. But then it vanished, all of it in a single night. The story first came to light decades ago when Soviet researchers flew over the region during a routine mapping mission. They spotted a small settlement, marked it, and when a land team went to confirm it days later, there was nothing. The coordinates were correct. The structures had been noted from above, but on the ground, just snow, untouched, unbroken. No houses, no footprints, no wreckage, just a flat frozen clearing. Years later, during a warmer spring melt, a team went back, and this time they found traces, only a few. A pot still half filled with burned millet. A sled tipped over near a tree, and nearby a wooden cabin foundation sunken into the earth, its beams split, its roof gone. But the most haunting detail, tools left mid-use, an axe still embedded in a tree stump. Boots beside a bench, as if the person wearing them had just stepped out and never returned. And inside one shallow cellar, they found what looked like a cooking hearth, still blackened, as if fire had burned there not long ago. No bones, no signs of a struggle, no sign that anyone ever left on foot. It was as if the entire population, dozens of people, had simply evaporated into snow. Local oral traditions speak of the place. They don't give it a name, only a warning. Don't stay past the first ice, they say. The forest watches. Some believe the village was taken by a blizzard so violent it collapsed the structures and buried the people deep beneath drifts. But no storm that strong was recorded that year. And even so, where were the remains? Where were the collapsed roofs? Why were some items above the snow line, while others were beneath? Other stories say it was a curse, that the land was not meant for settlement, that something ancient in the forest had been disturbed. Some hunters who passed nearby in later years claimed they saw lights moving through the trees at night, flickering, faint, but when they approached, they found nothing. No fire, no torch, just cold air and silence. Archaeologists who study Siberian disappearances often reference the Dyatlov Pass Incident, another case where people vanished under bizarre conditions. But this was different. There were no remains, no panic, just absence. It didn't feel like people ran. It felt like people were removed. Theories range from natural gas leaks that caused mass hallucinations and wanderings to sudden sinkholes that opened beneath the structures to more fringe ideas about dimensional rifts or alien abductions or ancient spirits. But none of these explain the still warm hearth or the dropped spoon or the untouched snow. Even decades later, the mystery remains unsolved. No one has rebuilt there. No markers exist, and locals still avoid the area. Today, it's simply called the village that vanished. A whisper in the Siberian wind. A story told quietly near firelight. If you go looking for it, the forest will guide you, but not kindly. Because in places like this, some absences feel louder than any noise, and some mysteries were never meant to be uncovered. The skeleton with the metal heart. In the quiet countryside of Eastern Europe, near a hill where the soil turns dark and soft, a team of archaeologists was digging into what they thought was an ordinary burial site. A routine survey, a few simple graves, maybe some pottery or bone fragments. But what they found was not ordinary. Not all. Just under the surface, laid in an angled stone-lined pit, was a human skeleton. Aged, partially crumbled, but still intact until they reached the chest. That's where everything changed. Instead of ribs, there were rods. Thin metallic rods inserted where the rib cage should have been, not hammered in, not glued or strapped, fused delicately, almost surgically. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't armor. It was internal. The skeleton had been buried with metal inside the chest, and no one could explain it. Initial tests dated the burial to somewhere between 900 and 1200 CE, far before any known surgical implants. Even the oldest examples of prosthetics or implants were nothing like this. But more surprising was the metal itself. Lab analysis showed a strange combination: high in nickel, extremely pure iron, and traces of something not native to the region. A metal signature not found in local soils. No mines nearby, no trade records, and no tool or artifact from that era used this blend. The structure was too precise to be accidental. It curved where the ribs would have been. It followed the chest cavity's shape, suggesting someone had replaced or reinforced this person's ribs carefully and in the center of it all. In place of the sternum, a solid plate just under the size of a palm, flat, smoothed on. The edges resting right where the heart would have been. Some whispered it looked like armor for the soul. Others called it metal heart, but the bones told more. The skeleton had no trauma marks, no signs of surgery, no scarring on the ribs, and yet the rods were not laid after death. They had been placed while the body was still fresh, possibly during life. But how? There were no medical tools capable of this in the region or the time, unless whoever did this had knowledge far beyond what we understand from that era. Or perhaps the knowledge had been forgotten. The burial was solitary. No grave goods, no offerings, just the body and the rods. Nearby graves were simple wooden coffins, ceramic bowls. Nothing unusual. Only this grave with its strange contents and its silence. The locals didn't even have a legend about it. No curse, no warning. It had simply been buried and missed. Some believe the person may have suffered from a rare chest injury, that the rods were added to help support a collapsed rib cage. But that doesn't explain the metal choice or the skill or why there's no other record of such a procedure existing anywhere near the site. Other theories drift further that this person may have belonged to a lost sect, one that experimented with the body or honored the dead by enhancing them. But again, no supporting evidence, no other graves like it, only this one. Then there's a darker possibility that the body wasn't from the region holes, that the person, whoever they were, was brought there after death, buried. Quickly, deliberately, hidden among ordinary graves, as if to keep their presence quiet. If so, who were they hiding it from? And why didn't anyone ever come looking? Today, the skeleton is kept in a secure, climate-controlled archive, still being studied, still causing arguments among researchers. Every year, more scans are run, more data collected. But the questions remain: who was this person? Why did they have a metal chest centuries before such things existed? And what kind of world did they live in, where this was even possible? The fox-faced pouch high in the Andean Mountains, thousands of meters above sea level. A cave sat sealed for centuries. Cold air, thin oxygen, and silence. Inside that cave, archaeologists discovered something no one expected. A leather pouch, perfectly preserved, still intact, still tied shut. But this pouch wasn't like any ordinary artifact. It was made from the faces of 3 foxes stitched together with thin sinew. The faces hadn't rotted or crumbled. Their teeth were visible, the eyes long gone, but their shapes were unmistakable. One at the front, 2 sewn on the sides. The bag was small, something that could be tied to a belt or carried close to the chest. It had been placed deep in a rocky crevice, sealed behind loose stones, hidden almost like an offering. But when scientists carefully opened it, the real mystery began. Inside the fox-face pouch was a bundle of plant material carefully wrapped, separated, and labeled using small wooden sticks and thread. These were not random herbs, and they were not local. Lab tests confirmed the presence of Banisteropsis caapi, a vine used to brew ayahuasca, a powerful hallucinogenic tea. Psychotria viridis, the leaf that activates the vision-inducing effect. Traces of cocoa leaves, harmon, and other psychoactive elements. In other words, this wasn't a healing kit. It was a ritual package, something a shaman would carry. But the problem was this. These plants do not grow in the high-altitude Andes. They grow deep in the Amazon basin, hundreds of kilometers away, in a completely different environment. So how'd they get here? The only explanation is that someone over 1,000 years ago traveled with this bag from the rainforest into the mountains. Not for trade, not for farming, but for something else. A giorni, a ritual, a vision quest. Researchers estimate the bag is between 900 and 00 years old, and it's the earliest known evidence that humans combined these particular plants to make ayahuasca. The mix isn't random. Each plant must be used in exact proportions. Used incorrectly, they can be toxic. Used properly, they can induce visions lasting for hours. Intense, vivid, sometimes terrifying. Whoever prepared this pouch knew what they were doing. They weren't experimenting. They were carrying knowledge, possibly passed down through generations. But there's something else, something even more unsettling. In the folds of the pouch, they found a small darkened stick, a tube, actually carved from bone, likely llama. And when examined under a microscope, it showed inhalation residue. Someone had used it to breathe. In powdered substances, a nasal delivery method still used today in certain shamanic ceremonies, which means the pouch wasn't just for storage. It had been used. And then there's the foxes. Why their faces? In Indian mythology, foxes are considered messengers between worlds. Not evil, not divine, but something in between. Watchers, tricksters, spirits that cross from the seen to the unseen, to where a fox to carry its face may have been a way of asking for safe passage through visions or a way to ward off what waits on the other side. One theory suggests that the shaman who owned this pouch may have taken it to a sacred summit, a pilgrimage site, performed a ritual, and left the pouch behind, buried in stone to complete the cycle. Or maybe something went wrong. Maybe the visions didn't stop and the pouch was hidden for protection, so no one would find it, so no one would ever open it again. But it was opened, and now the story continues. Today, the pouch is housed in a secure museum in Bolivia. Its contents cataloged, sealed, and studied. But nothing has answered the biggest question. Why combine jungle herbs in a fox's face and bury it 13,000 feet above sea level? What vision did the shaman seek? And what do they seek? The lungs of stone. In the dry highlands of southern Peru, the air is thin, the wind moves slowly, and time seems to stand still. Archaeologists have been working along the cliffside tombs, dusty, sealed crypts carved into ancient rock. They were searching for mummies, well-preserved bodies from forgotten cultures. Many had already been found in this region, bundled in cloth, placed in sitting positions, their faces still frozen in silence. But this mummy was different. At first glance, it looked normal. Curled forward in fetal posture, wrapped in faded linen, teeth intact, fingernails still visible. But when researchers scanned the chest cavity, they saw something impossible. Two solid masses, dense, rounded, sitting exactly where the lungs should be. Not shriveled tissue, not collapsed organs, stone. They thought it was a mistake. Maybe rocks had fallen into the chest during burial, or perhaps mineral-rich groundwater had fossilized the lungs over time. But when they opened the mummy under sterile conditions, it was clear the stones weren't loose. They were perfectly shaped, resting within the rib cage, mirroring the lungs in size and position. Not glued, not carved, not forced in. They fit as if they had grown there. Geologists were brought in. They examined the material. The stone was a form of kaolite fused with other local minerals. It was dense but organic. Traces were found inside. Fragments of soft tissue, tiny veins, mineralized but still visible. That's when the theory changed. This wasn't just stone. It was once alive. What might have happened? One theory is petrification, a rare and natural process where organic tissue slowly turns to mineral. Usually this happens over thousands of years under just the right environmental conditions. And even then, it's fragmentary, never this complete, never this symmetrical. Both lungs perfectly preserved, fully mineralized, as if something in this person's body or burial caused their lungs to turn to stone. But why only the lungs? The heart, liver, stomach were all normal, desiccated, yes, but not petrified. Only the lungs had been transformed. And here's the stranger part. The stone didn't match anything from the surrounding geology. It wasn't from the tomb walls or the cliff rock or the nearby caves. It came from somewhere else. Researchers began asking different questions. Could the lungs have been ritually replaced? Some lost to eerie tradition. But there were no cut marks, no trauma, no sign of surgery, and no known Indian culture ever practiced organ replacement with stone. Another theory whispered, but never formally published, is that the transformation began before death, that the lungs had already started turning while the person was still alive. Some unknown disease, some rare chemical imbalance, or something not from this world. You see, the body showed signs of intense inhalation damage. Microscopic pitting in the nasal cavity, black carbon. Build-up, even traces of metal dust. Whatever this person breathed in, it altered them from the inside out. Maybe it was volcanic dust. Maybe an unknown substance from deep mines. Or maybe it was something ritualistic, a smoke or powder inhaled during spiritual rites, used once or many times. And it didn't just harm the lungs, it replaced them, turned breath into stone. Today, the mummy is kept under constant observation in a Peruvian research lab. The stone lungs have been scanned in 3D, copied. Digitally, tested dozens of times, but they remain a singular case. No other mummy has been found with anything like it. No writings explain it. No legend refers to it. Only silence. And two lungs that no longer breathe, but still sit quietly, untouched and preserved. The house that grows in the remote stretches of northern Mongolia, far from any highway, far from cities, far even from maps, there sits a house, just one, surrounded by plains, by wind, and by silence. The locals call it the GR, bear, which loosely translates to the growing home. But it's not just a name. It's a mystery passed down for generations. They say the house is older than the road nearby, older than the fence posts, older than any memory. The strangest part, though, each year without fail, it grows. Not outward like someone added a room, not upward like someone built another level. But inside, the walls don't move. The roof doesn't stretch. The bricks stay untouched. But people swear quietly, calmly, and without drama that when you enter the house in summer, it feels slightly wider. Just enough to notice, just enough to doubt yourself. And by the time you're back the next year, it feels bigger again. Archaeologists first heard about the house from a herder who wandered through the region. He wasn't looking for attention. He was just sharing a story. When a small team finally made the journey, they brought lasers and scanners, rulers and notebooks. The house was simple. Mud brick, wooden support beams, and a roof patched over a dozen times. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, but something felt off. One researcher whispered later in a report, the air inside the house feels wide. The corners look normal, but when you measure the length twice, it never matches. You walk 12 steps, then count 13. Stranger still, the windows didn't match the angles. They were slanted, but the frame was level. A wooden shelf near the back wall was flush one year and floating half an inch away the next. Some believed it was the foundation shifting. Some blamed thermal expansion, but none of those explain why the inside of the house expands while the outside never does. One year, a local elder claimed the house was alive. Not in the fairy tale sense, not breathing or moving, but growing the way a stone grows in a riverbed. Slow, imperceptible, inevitable. She said it feeds on stories. People come in, they whisper secrets, and the house remembers. That's why it grows. When asked if anyone had tried staying overnight, she laughed. One boy did. He came out older than his father, hair white, eyes quiet. He never spoke again. Of course, stories like that get exaggerated over time. But the measurements don't lie. Over 20 years, records show a consistent shift. Roughly 2 centimeters of interior space added per year. It doesn't sound like much until you remember the house was first measured in 1926. The windows haven't changed. The roof hasn't changed. The walls are the same. But inside, the floor is longer. The ceiling is taller. And the back corner, where a shadow always sits, has slowly started to curve outward like the start of a hallway that didn't used to be there. Tourists don't visit. There are no signs, no guides, no gift shop. The house just waits. Every year, someone comes to measure it. Every year, they leave confused. One archaeologist made a final note in her journal before leaving the field entirely. She wrote, "If it's growing, what is it growing toward? And when will it stop?" The locals never ask. They just walk around it when passing. And when children grow old enough to ask about it, the elders always say the same thing. "It's not our house. We just live nearby." And then they change the subject because sometimes mysteries don't want to be solved. Sometimes they just want space. And slowly, year by year, this one's making more of it. The skeleton holding a doll. Somewhere deep in the Anatolian plateau, where the hills are dust-cold and time sleeps quietly beneath the soil. A burial site was found, not grand, not guarded by statues. Just earth, silence, and something softly unsettling beneath. It wasn't part of any grand expedition. No gold, no temple, just a cluster of shallow graves. And in one of them, a child. The bones were delicate, small, curled, barely more than whispers of body left behind by time. But it was the child's hands that froze the archaeologists. They weren't crossed in rest. They weren't at the side. They were wrapped tight around something. It took hours to clear it properly, and when the dust lifted, they saw it clearly. A wooden doll simple in shape. 2 arms, legs carved in sharp lines. A flat face, but strangely detailed. Not just a toy, not just a block of wood. Its eyes had been painted once, though time had worn them away. But what remained unmistakably was the hair, real hair, human hair, still tangled, still clinging to the doll's head 3,000 years later. No one knew what to say. Was it a ritual object? Was it meant to comfort the child in the afterlife? Or was it something darker? Something meant to carry something with them? There are no other grave goods, no beads, no jewelry, no amulets, just the bones of a child and a doll carved with care. Researchers dated the burial to around 1200 BCE. At that time, wooden toys existed. Hair sometimes was used in dolls, but never like this. This wasn't a noble's tomb. This was a village grave. So, how did such a rare, intricate item end up here? Worse still, when the hair was tested, it didn't match the child. It didn't match any remains from the site. In fact, the DNA was still viable. Unusual for something so old. It belonged to a girl aged around 9. And whoever she was never found. Some believe the doll was made in memory of a sibling. Others believe it was given as a token of protection. But then there's the last theory, a quiet one, that the doll wasn't made for the child, that the doll belonged to someone else. And when that person vanished, someone gave the doll to this child to hold on to it forever. One researcher made a final note in her report. The child is clutching the doll so tightly, even in death, that it's hard to separate their stories. They never removed the doll from the skeleton. It was re-earied exactly as found, preserved, protected. Whatever that child was holding on to, whatever story that ball carries, it will stay silent and sleep a little longer beneath the soil. The fire that burned in snow in the endless cold of Siberia, where winters last longer than memory, and the air itself feels heavy with silence. There lies a patch of ground no one wants to talk about. It doesn't show up on maps, not because it's hidden, but because even satellites seem to ignore it. The locals call it, which loosely translates to the place of fire that does not melt. It's just earth black and charred. And yet, even in the dead of winter, when the snow stacks higher than a man, that patch stays bare. Not a flake, not a crust, only soot and something else, heat. The first scientists to visit called it a geothermal anomaly. They measured the surface 23 degrees Celsius, but only in the top 3 centimeters below that frozen solid, above that barely steaming. One researcher placed their gloved hand gently against the earth and felt something strange, not just warmth, pulsing like a heartbeat. The story begins decades earlier. A hunter had lost his way during a blizzard. Half blind and freezing, he stumbled into a clearing where snow refused to settle. He thought it was a dream, a warm patch in the storm. He lay down, hoping for shelter. And when they found him 2 days later, he was still alive, barely frostbitten, starved, but untouched by the cold around him. His clothes had scorch marks. He never spoke again, only whispered over and over. The ground was breathing. When archaeologists finally examined the area, they expected volcanic activity. But there were no faults, no vents, no lava tubes. The rock wasn't volcanic. It was sedimentary. But beneath the burnt topsoil, they found something else. Charcoal, ash remains, as if something had burned long ago. But not from above. From within, they dug carefully just 1 meter down. And there, beneath centuries of frost, they found bone. Crisp, flaked, burnt, but not cooked. It was something else. Bone that had fractured. Under pressure, not just heat. No structure nearby, no tools, no village, just one single femur. Blackened and broken. The carbon dating over 3,500 years old. And the weird part, it had soot fused into it as if the fire didn't burn on the body but through it. To this day, the patch of scorched ground remains. In summer, birds avoid flying overhead. In winter, snow curls around it, but never lands, and the soil's still warm, still pulsing, still silent. One of the expedition team wrote in her notes, "I watched snowflakes hover above the patch, then dissolve before touching the ground. No steam, no flame, just disappearance." Some say it's a relic of a forgotten ritual. Others whisper it's a grave marker for something too powerful to bury cold. A warning maybe, or a scar. But the ground keeps its secret, warm, dark breathing. And if you visit, if you kneel close, they say you can hear a hum. Not a sound, but a feeling. Like the fire never went out, like something is still burning and waiting. The tree with human bones. In a quiet village in central India, far from the tourist paths and temple crowds, stands a tree the locals do not touch. It's tall, old, twisted in places, smooth in others. At first glance, it looks like any other sacred banyan tree. The kind people walk past with folded hands. The kind that watches generations grow and fade. But if you step closer, if you dare to look closely at its base, you'll see something else. Not roots, not bark, but bone. Dozens of them, human. The tree is known locally as Javan Bahak, the life carrier. According to the village elders, the tree was already ancient when their grandfathers were born, but no one planted it. It simply appeared. The story goes that long ago, there was a famine. The earth had cracked, the rivers had dried, and the cremation grounds were full. A plague followed. So many died that the villagers couldn't keep up with the burials. One night, someone buried a body at the edge of the village under a sapling. They say by morning, the tree had grown taller. By a week, it had leaves. By a month, it was full grown. And then they saw it. A hand, white, barely visible between the bark, wrapped tight, fused into the wood itself. Archaeologists arrived only recently. It wasn't an official dig. A traveling researcher had heard rumors of a bone tree. At first, they assumed it was a symbolic story, ritual language, metaphor, until they touched the trunk and realized the bark was not consistent. Some parts felt hollow, others too dense. In one knot near the base, there was a shape unmistakable, a human skull embedded. Using ground-penetrating radar, they mapped the roots and found not one, not two, but at least 40 sets of human remains. Femurs, ribs, skull fragments, jaws woven between and within the roots. But these weren't just buried near the tree. They were inside it. Some had fused entirely into the wood. Others looked like they had been gripped by the roots and pulled inward. One anthropologist wrote, "It's like the tree decided to keep them, not just grow around them, but absorb them." The remains date back 300 to 400 years, all from the same era, the time of famine, the time of plague. But that doesn't explain everything. One piece of the puzzle stood out. A small bone shard near the surface of the tree's bark still had fresh marrow inside. Not preserved, not fossilized, fresh, impossible. Unless something in the tree's chemistry kept it alive, or something else. The villagers have their own stories. They say the tree chooses that it remembers those buried beneath it, that if someone is near death and touches the trunk, the tree can keep them. Not save, not heal, just keep. The site is now closed to the public, barred off. But every year during the hottest month, flowers still bloom at the base of the trunk. Tiny white ones that don't grow anywhere else. Some say they're ordinary. Others say they're not petals at all. But pieces of bone turn soft by time. No one touches them. No one cuts the tree. And no one tries to count how many more it might be holding. Because if it is still growing, then maybe the tree isn't done. Not yet. The painting that aged first in the limestone heart of southern France, hidden deep inside a cave that had been sealed for thousands of years. A single painting changed everything. Not because of what it showed, but because of what happened to it before anything else. The discovery was made in a remote area near the Vézère Valley. It wasn't a grand cave like Lascaux or Chauvet. No famous animals, no herds, no spears, just a narrow corridor of stone. Cool, dry, and oddly silent, even for a cave. The walls were pristine, smooth chalk gray, with not a single sign of moisture or decay. But then about 30 m inside, on one particular slab, there was a painting, primitive, yes, but detailed. Red ochre, black charcoal outlines. It showed a human figure kneeling beneath something large. The shape is unclear. Some say it's an animal. Others say it's a structure or a shadow. But the real mystery wasn't what was painted. It was what had happened to it. The painting was cracked. Lines ran through the pigment like shattered glass. Discoloration bloomed across its surface like a bruise, and faint threads of mold curled at the edges of the figure. But nowhere else. Nowhere. The stone around it smooth, unbroken. No water stains, no mineral buildup, no signs of temperature shift. Just that one image weathered as if it had aged 100 years faster than the rest of the cave. One researcher called it biologically impossible. Samples were taken. No leaks were found. The cave's climate had been stable for over 20,000 years. The mold, it wasn't native. The strain didn't match any known species growing in nearby caves. And yet it hadn't spread. It only appeared on the pigment, as if something in the paint itself had decayed. Some thought the artist had used organic material, blood maybe, or something that reacted at time differently. But chemical tests showed only standard prehistoric compounds, nothing out of the ordinary. Then someone noticed something chilling. The figure in the painting was also cracked. The paint around it held together, but the paint within the figure, the body, the hands, the face had started to flake as if the painting was aging from the inside out. No other images in the cave were affected. Even nearby handprints drawn with the same materials remained untouched, clean, intact, fresh-looking. Just this one figure quietly collapsing into time, like it had lived too long or seen too much. Some call it coincidence. Others think it's a message or a warning painted too close to something the artist wasn't meant to remember. Local legends now surround the site. The villagers call the cave Laserdite. The spirits exhale. They believe the image is alive, that it absorbs the years of those who look at it, that every person who stands before it leaves something behind and weakens it more. The site was sealed off 2 years after discovery. Too unstable, they said, too fragile. Some believed the painting would be dust by now, but private team visited with permission last winter. They took photos and found the figure had changed again. The cracks had deepened. The mold had spread slightly, and the eyes, once barely visible, now looked darker, not because of damage, but because something had deepened. The shadow. No one paints in caves anymore. No one sure if the image is dying or becoming something else. But whatever it isn't finished. And if the painting aged before the cave ever did, What exactly was it trying to show us? Or worse, who was it waiting for? The candle that melts backward in the dry hills of southeastern Turkey, where ruins sleep. Beneath layers of wind-blown dust and half-buried temples, whisper of forgotten gods. A strange object was found during a dig beneath an old stone altar. It wasn't gold. It wasn't bone. It was wax. A candle perfectly shaped, undisturbed. But something about it immediately felt wrong. The wax was soft to the touch, as if it had just been poured, though carbon dating showed it to be over 2,000 years old. The wick was still intact, though darkened at the tip, almost like it had once been lit. Curious, one of the archaeologists, against protocol, took a match and lit it. And then everything changed. The flame rose as expected, soft, steady, silent. But the wax didn't drip down. It rose. Molten droplets climbed upward from the flame like steam in reverse, only to reform at the base of the candle. No pudli, no miss, no waste. The candle repaired itself as it burned. At first, they thought it was an illusion. Heat, convection, strange light, a trick of composition. But under infrared, high-speed cameras, and thermal sensors, the result was the same. The wax traveled against gravity. It cooled, solidified, and returned to its base like nothing had happened. 1 hour passed, then 2. The flame never wavered. The candle never shortened. It simply burned endlessly. Researchers tried to recreate it. They analyzed the composition. Nothing strange. Bees, wax, traces of resin, a few unknown organic binders, but nothing that explained the reversal. The wick, however, was peculiar. It wasn't cotton. It was braided fiber, unlike any plant or textile recorded in that region. Almost metallic when examined under a microscope, and it responded to heat, not by charring, but by flexing like a muscle. The candle was removed from the site and taken to a secure lab. There, strange things began happening. A lab assistant reported the scent of flowers while the candle burned, though none were nearby. Another claimed to hear a faint hum in rhythm with the flicker. A third fell asleep watching it and dreamed of walking through tunnels beneath the earth lit by thousands of identical candles lining the walls. When he woke, he drew them, dozens, everyone melting backward. The local legend speaks of Zaman Tersi, the candle of time reversed, said to have been made by a priest who wanted to trap a moment forever. A flame that would never end. A candle that would undo decay. Some even believed it could reverse death if watched long enough. Of course, these are only stories. But the candle still exists, locked away in a lab drawer. Too dangerous or too sacred to test again. No one knows how it works. No one knows who made it, and no one knows what will happen if it ever burns all the way through. If it ever does. The Headless Queen's Tomb. In the deserts of ancient Nubia, where the Nile stretches southward into forgotten lands, a royal tomb was uncovered, hidden beneath centuries of silence and sand. It wasn't expected. The archaeologists had been surveying temple debris when ground-penetrating radar revealed a hollow space beneath the stone. What they found inside was unlike anything they'd seen. A crypt untouched, a sarcophagus sealed, artifacts arranged in ceremonial precision, and at the center, a queen, or what was left of her. She was adorned in gold-thread linen, rings on each finger, amulets pressed into the folds of her robes, a dagger of ivory, a staff tipped with copper, but her skull was missing, and in its place, resting perfectly on the neck, as if it belonged, was a smooth round stone sphere, polished, cold, heavier than it looked. The tomb was dated to the 4th century BC, during the Neolithic period of Nubian rule, an era where queens weren't just consorts, but rulers. The inscriptions on the walls confirmed it. She was royal, a Khand, a queen of high rank. Her name lost to erosion, but her status carved into history. And yet, no skull, no mandible, no trace of bone from the head, just the sphere. At first, it was believed to be symbolic, a ritual object, perhaps a sign of celestial worship. The moon maybe, or the sun locked in stone. But chemical analysis of the sphere revealed something disturbing. Traces of blood, proteins, human, old, and faint. Impressions near the base, like tendon marks, as if the sphere hadn't been placed there later, but had been pressed into the neck before burial, as if it replaced the skull entirely. The rest of the tomb was typical offerings of grain, perfume bottles, still sealed, jewelry shaped in the image of deities long forgotten. But hidden in a stone box near the feet was something stranger. A second jawbone. No matching skull, just a jaw. Filed teeth still flecked with gold dust. Theories began to surface. One claimed the queen was executed, beheaded, and the skull destroyed. Another said the skull was sacred, removed to prevent her soul from rising again. But the local oral history had a different story. They speak of the one who saw too far, a queen who is said to have visions, not dreams, but waking ones. She predicted storms, droughts, the deaths of kings. Some worshipped her, others feared her. The priest said she had stared too long into the realm of the gods, and that her head had to be sealed to keep the visions from spreading. The orb, they say, was carved from the stone at the center of the oldest temple, the one now swallowed by sand. The tomb was resealed after the discovery. Too many unanswered questions, too many fears about removing the orb from her body. And so she lies there still, a queen with no face, guarded by symbols, and crowned not with gold, but with stone, still watching, still waiting. Though no one is sure what she saw, or what happens if someone sees it next. The cracked thread, in the blistering heat of Sudan, just beyond. The crumbled pyramids of ancient Nubia. A team of archaeologists uncovered a tomb buried deeper than expected. It wasn't grand, no towering chamber or gold-lined walls, just a narrow rock-cut shaft leading into silence. Inside lay a single stone coffin, plain but undisturbed. No royal symbols, no inscriptions, just dust, time, and a linen bundle tucked under what remained of the occupant's hands. It looked ordinary at first, old cloth yellowed by centuries. But when the team carefully lifted it, something unusual happened. Thread broke, not frayed, not rotted, but snapped cleanly like glass under tension. And as the pieces fell apart, the room fell silent. One of the researchers, reaching to gather the pieces, suddenly paused. The moment she touched one, a hum, not loud, not electrical, just the softest vibration felt in the fingertips like the distant ringing of a tuning fork. Long after it struck, they checked their equipment. No interference, no nearby sources of sound. They touched a second piece. Same hum, same faint pulse. 7 pieces. Total. Each one broken. Each one humming quietly when touched. But only once. Only the first time. The thread was taken to a lab. Tests revealed it was flax-based linen like most textiles of the era. But it was unnaturally strong, denser, more compact, and something else was woven into the fibers. Microscopic crystals, not mineral dust or sand, but something manufactured, structured. They didn't match any known material from the region or from the period. Some believed they were resonators, tiny inclusions, designed to vibrate at a specific frequency. But the question was, why put them in a burial thread? There were no writings in the tomb, no grave goods, no obvious purpose, only a small stone pendant near the pelvis, shaped like an ear, carved smooth, worn down by time. Its meaning was unknown, but local legends collected from Nubian elders in nearby villages told a strange story. A woman who wore words into silence. A priestess who stitched secrets into cloth. Secrets only the gods were meant to hear. They called her Zanara, the listener. She was buried with a thread of divine music, a warning, a record, or maybe a lock. No one knows what the thread was meant to hold back or reveal, but one researcher took the 7 pieces into a soundproof chamber and placed them in a circle. He touched each one again in order. The hums were fainter now, but still there, and in the silence between vibrations. He thought he heard whispers, not words, but shapes, patterns, and sound that didn't belong to machines or people. The pieces have since been sealed away in a magnetic containment unit just in case, and the rest of the tomb remains closed. But some say linen isn't just for burial. It's for memory, and sometimes it remembers too well. The twins in the same skull. In the highlands of northern Chile, where the desert meets the mountains and the silence stretches for miles, a burial site was uncovered that archaeologists thought would be like any other. Stone-lined graves, bones arranged with care, fragments of pottery, and worn textiles hinting at ancient lives. But then they found it. A skull. Just one, but not like the others. Not cracked or deformed by time. Not damaged. It was wrong, not broken, not incomplete, just doubled. At first glance, it looked like a wide cranium broad in the temples. But as the dirt was brushed away, the truth emerged. Two jaw lines perfectly formed, layered one above the other, and two rows of teeth, separate, not misaligned. One belonged to a child, the other to someone older, but they were housed in the same skull. Same bone, same structure, fused from birth. And yet the body below, just one. One rib cage, one spine, two arms, two legs, no doubling, no twins, just one life. The scientists were baffled. They'd seen cranial fusions, parasitic twins, even deformities caused by ritual shaping. But this wasn't that. Both jaws were functional, no signs of stunting or decay. The skull had developed as if it expected to have two faces, as if it had grown not for one mind, but two. Some suggested a rare form of chronopagus, parasiticus, when one twin's head is absorbed into the other. But there was no partial head, no extra tissue, just a perfectly balanced dual skull, and both jaws bore signs of wear, as if both had eaten. The body was dated to around 1,000 years ago, part of a little understood Andean culture. No writing, no name, just the remains and the questions. Next to the body was a carved stone figure, a twin-headed idol holding a bowl in each hand. The heads shared one neck, and their mouths were open wide. Inside the bowls, traces of bone, ash and plant resin, possibly used in ritual offerings, possibly for twins. Local legends tell of mirror twins, souls born into one body, destined to see both the waking world and the world of spirits. One twin would speak for the living, the other for the dead. Some were feared, others worshipped, but all were kept hidden for safety or secrecy. The villagers say these children were often buried far from the rest, sometimes with their mouths filled with salt, so they couldn't whisper between worlds. The skull now sits in a private museum, not on public display. Researchers still debate its origin, its function, its meaning. But late at night, when the room is quiet, a few say they've heard it. A clicking sound like two sets of teeth grinding in turn. Not aggressive, not random, just coordinated, as if something is trying to speak. Together, the eyeless idol. In the arid hills of southern Pakistan, far from any modern city, archaeologists unearth the remnants of a forgotten settlement. Stone foundations, broken pottery, worn figurines. But at the very edge of the excavation site, buried deep in compacted soil, they uncovered something much stranger. An idol carved from a single slab of black basalt, nearly 8 foot tall, standing upright, untouched by weather, as if it had been placed there only yesterday. Its hands were outstretched. Its robe flowed in ancient stylized patterns. Its face was solemn, timeless, and almost human, but its eyes were missing, not damaged, not eroded, deliberately smooth. 2 hollow sockets, perfectly rounded but with no iris, no pupil, no detail. Every other statue from that culture, dozens of them found in nearby digs, featured intricately carved eyes, wide, focused, meant to see. But not this one. This figure stared blankly forward as if it was never meant to see anything at all. The statue didn't match known religious figures, no inscriptions, no symbols on the base, no offerings left behind. But it was positioned carefully, facing a rise in the land where nothing remains today. Just sand, stone, and sky. The locals, when asked, told an old tale of a being called Chazm bin Nahim, the one who watches without eyes, a silent guardian. They said, one who sees not the world before it, but the world behind. Some said it was built to ward off curses. Others believed it held the memories of those who died in silence, the blind, the forgotten, the erased. And then one story stood out of a ruler who had all his statues carved with eyes, except one, because that one he feared saw him too clearly. So he had its pupil smoothed out, erased, silenced. But the people whispered that it still remembered. Modern researchers ran scans on the idol. No hidden compartments, no pigment remains. But near the eyes they found something odd. Man, it grooves like scratches made by metal tools. Someone had once carved something there and then deliberately removed it, and not long after its discovery. Strange issues began during the excavation. Equipment failed. GPS maps became unreliable. Workers refused to dig near the idols. Feet. One man claimed he saw shadows moving across its face at night. Even though it was fully illuminated, the statue now rests in a museum storage room, not on display. Not because of damage, but because visitors complained, saying they felt watched. Even though the idol had no eyes, security footage shows nothing unusual. But some frames, rare ones, have faint distortions around the face like static or a blink. No one knows who made the idol or why. Only it was denied vision. But some believe it. Never needed eyes because it was never made to see the world we live in, only the one we don't. The skeleton wrapped in chains in the quiet countryside of southern Italy, where olive groves roll over ancient hills. A construction team breaking ground for a vineyard stumbled upon something unexpected. Not a foundation, not a ruin, but a hollow thud beneath their shovels. They had struck stone. Curious, they called in local archaeologists. At first, it seemed like another forgotten grave. Italy is full of them, layered histories, buried just beneath the soil. But this one felt different. And soon it was clear this was no ordinary burial. There was no tomb, no carved box or burial chamber. Just rough, uneven stone slabs stacked like a lid, and beneath them a skeleton lying stiff, tight, and bound, wrapped in iron chains. The bones were well preserved. The form was male, early adult. But what drew everyone's attention were the cold rings of rusted metal still encircling the ribs, arms, ankles, and neck. No coffin, no utility, no weapons, just dirt and chains, thick ones, heavy forged by hand. There was no marker, no writing, no coin to pay the ferrymen, just silence. The team excavated carefully. They removed the remains piece by piece. As they studied the bones, they noticed something. No signs of torture, no broken bones, no trauma, only one odd feature. His arms had been crossed tightly to his chest and locked in place by the metal bands. He wasn't bound after death. He was likely buried that way, and maybe alive. The carbon dating pointed to around 2nd century AD, Roman imperial era, but this wasn't a Roman burial. Romans cremated or buried with grave goods. They honored their dead, especially in the South. This man was sealed away. So who was he? A criminal, a traitor, a cursed soul? One theory suggests ritual punishment. A person condemned not just in life, but in death, not to escape, not to return. In some regional traditions, there were beliefs that certain people, sorcerers, oath breakers, or the twice dead had to be pinned to the earth, chained, silenced, kept from rising again. Local folklore speaks of Link Katana, the chained one, a man who defied both gods and men. He betrayed a pact, they say, and brought ruin to his village. So the elders bound him in metal and buried him far from sacred ground, not as justice, but as containment. What disturbed the archaeologists most wasn't the bones or the chains. It was the fact that the ground showed no signs of being disturbed after the burial, which meant the grave had remained sealed for nearly 2,000 years. No looters, no visitors, no mourners, just the sound of metal slowly rusting in the dark. Today, the skeleton rests in a special containment chamber in a research lab near Naples. But the chains are left on, not because they were fused, but because after they were removed briefly for analysis, every motion sensor in the lab went off for 6 hours. Even though nothing moved, not visibly anyway. Whoever he was meant to stay there. And maybe, just maybe, we should have let him. The skeleton wrapped in chains. In a remote corner of southern Italy, archaeologists were excavating what they believed to be a small Roman outpost. A forgotten hillside used briefly and then abandoned during one of the empire's lesser-known campaigns. They expected potsherds, maybe some coins. They found neither. Instead, they unearthed something that would spark years of unanswered questions. Just beneath a shallow layer of soil laid in a crude trench cut directly into limestone was a human skeleton, positioned face down with both arms and legs bound in rusted iron chains. There was no coffin, no marker, no offerings, no amulets, no pottery shards, nothing to indicate who this person was or why they were buried this way. The bones had been there for a long time based on the condition of the iron, the decomposition of the joints, and the soil strata. The skeleton is estimated to be from around the 5th century AD, right around the time when the Western Roman Empire was collapsing into scattered warlord states, tribal invasions, and deep paranoia. And yet, the iron itself wasn't crude. The chains were carefully forged, not randomly hammered. Each link was deliberate, secure, too secure. Archaeologists first thought it might have been a prisoner, a criminal maybe. But even Roman prisoners were usually cremated or buried with some ceremony, often marked by shame or curse tablets. The skeleton had none. Then they considered ritual. Was this a human sacrifice? There were whispers of such things among certain fringe cults, though officially Rome had banned all sacrifice by the late imperial era. Yet here was a body buried far from any urban center, face down in the earth, bound and silenced. Local legends were quick to rise. Some said it was a cursed soul, a betrayer of gods. Others whispered of a plague bearer, chained not to punish the dead, but to contain something unnatural. But none of the stories matched the evidence. The skeleton was male, about 30 to 40 years old at time of death. Healthy joints, strong bones, no signs of disease or physical trauma, no breaks, no sword wounds, not even blunt force injuries to the skull. He didn't die violently, at least not visibly, so the questions deepened. Why was he in chains if he wasn't injured? And why bury him at all? If you wanted to bind him, usually people you fear are burned or buried deep or abandoned. But this one was placed gently in the trench, deliberately arranged, and the iron wasn't ordinary either. Lab tests showed the chains weren't local. The metallurgy pointed north, possibly Gaul, or even Germania, a place with different iron forging techniques than Italy at the time. Could this man have been a foreigner, a druid, a political prisoner, an outcast, or was something else entirely? And then there's the way he was buried face down. Throughout history, burying someone face down was a symbol, a message. In ancient times, it was used to mark disgrace or to prevent the spirit from rising. In medieval Europe, witches were sometimes buried face down to trap their souls. In ancient Egypt, enemies of the pharaoh might be buried this way as a curse. But in Rome, it's almost unheard of. Even in the darkest cases, traitors, gladiators, or outlaws, Romans buried with face up, as if even death couldn't strip away that last shred of dignity. So, was this man not Roman? Or had he done something even the empire refused to speak of? Some theorists believe the man was part of a banned cult, a sect so obscure it never made it into the history books, a group that practiced forbidden rites, perhaps involving binding or possession. The iron chains in this theory were not to contain his body, but his soul, an attempt to prevent it from leaving the earth. This is supported by something strange found beneath the skeleton. A layer of crushed herbs, almost like an offering, not common herbs either, but ones associated with purification. Myrtle, rue, wormwood, each used in Roman and pre-Roman times to ward off evil, cleanse spirits, or sanctify spaces. So was this a cleansing? A burial for someone feared not for what he did, but for what he carried. A sickness of the mind or the soul. And if so, did it work? Because the chains didn't last. Over time, the iron weakened. One chain across the right forearm had already broken from decay. The others are rusted, flaking, barely holding shape, and still the body remained unmoved. The area around the skeleton was examined thoroughly. Ground-penetrating radar revealed no additional bodies nearby. No temple, no altar, nothing that would explain the significance of this isolated grave. Only miles of silent hill country, rocky, earth, and the sighing wind. Some scientists quietly admit they feel unease around the skeleton. Not fear, but discomfort, a kind of watching, a sense that the grave wasn't just hidden. It was meant to be, and now that it's uncovered, what happens next? The bones were removed and studied, but no museum agreed to display them. Every institution cited lack of context, but rumor has it more than one declined without explanation. As of now, the skeleton sits boxed in climate-controlled storage, wrapped again in fresh iron bands out of caution or tradition. No one can say, but the mystery remains. Why bind the dead? Why bury them with chains in a time that no longer believed in ghosts? And what might we have disturbed that had rested so long in silence? The bones with letters deep beneath the sun-baked soil of Greece. Archaeologists uncovered a quiet necropolis dating back to the 5th century BCE. Simple burials, pottery shards, ceramic oil lamps. But one grave caught their attention. Inside a stone-lined burial pit lay the skeleton of a young adult. No gold, no jewelry, no weapon, just a single long bone, an ulna or radius placed gently beside the body. At first, it seemed ordinary until the conservators carefully lifted it out of the earth and saw the markings carved in neat, mysterious letters, tiny enough to require a magnifying lens. They weren't runes, not Greek script, not Latin, something older, something unique. They photographed it, enhanced the marks, and deciphered the first word. Remember etched carefully across the bone. It felt personal and haunting. Then came more words. Me love return. Half lines interrupted. Not full thoughts, but enough to stir a chill. Archaeologists later confirmed the letters dated from the time of the interment. Not modern graffiti. The chisel marks were ancient. The edges weathered, integrated into the bone structure. This wasn't a prank. It was a message from the dead. Who carved it? The person buried. It's rare, but not unheard of for people in ancient times to write on bones, usually animal. Bones as ritual tokens, but to carve on your own, that requires planning before death. Intention, a final statement. What did it mean? Some theorize it's a plea. Remember me, a love note, a curse, a prayer. Nearby were items. An unfinished clay cup, a handful of seeds, and a mirror fragment. Nothing to explain a message. The most compelling artifact, however, was the bone itself. The letters stop halfway through a sentence. Broken. The final letters erratic and rushed, which suggests the writer died while in the act. Conservators reconstructed the line. My heart remains here despite return, but we'll never know why they couldn't finish. Locals near the site whisper of the stone lover's grave, telling of a young messenger sent to protect a secret, betrayed, and entombed before delivering the truth. At night, they say, you can still hear footsteps echo in the tomb, though it's locked and unmapped from above. The bone with letters now sits in a secure gallery sealed behind glass, with only blue-lit background to let the etchings pop. Visitors often pause, silent. A few reports seeing shadows crossing the glass. Some researchers say it's history speaking, a private memorial from someone who wanted to be remembered. Others think it's unfinished,